The novel was inspired because I was researching the life and times of my great-grandfather, and he had an extraordinary life in the early part of the 20th century and had a very successful career in textiles and in the silent film industry. And so I thought that was a great taking off point, to build a fictional world around. I looked at a lot of old photo albums, which were absolutely fascinating and essential for me to get a sense of the visuals of the era, whether it was the interiors of houses or the way women dressed. It was a different era visually, and I wanted to create a landscape within my own mind, a sort of cinematic landscape, to see my characters moving through that landscape so that I could translate that onto the page. Most of my research on silent films had to come from books because unfortunately most Indian silent films have been lost. But there are some archival clips remaining, particularly those of Dada Saheb Phalke, which are there at the National Film Archive in Pune. And those were especially fascinating because many of those films were actually produced by my great-grandfather for the Hindustan Film Company, which produced many of Phalke's films. Those were amazing to look back on and see what sorts of special effects that were used. For example, in the film Kaliya Mardan, there's an amazing sequence of baby Krishna fighting the giant snake underwater, and there are bubbles rising around the action. This was fascinating because perhaps I didn't expect that level of sophistication for those early films, and that got me thinking about the immense amount of creativity that had gone in. So these were all things that inspired me to create the beginnings of the film industry in my novel. This chawl, Khatria Chitar, is where my great-grandfather lived when he started off in Bombay. And this is a good starting point to see how my actual family, and perhaps more importantly the family, the characters in my novel, how they moved through different locations in the city as their fortunes improved. So this is a typical chawl, a Maharashtrian chawl, where Tatya, my protagonist, starts his life and starts building a life for himself and his family. And so the chawl in my novel is very much based on this one. I also visited the apartment block where my great-grandfather moved once he had made a good amount of money. That building is still there. It's called Peer Bhoy Mansion. In my novel, it is Jamshedji Mansion. The area of Pedder Road, where my protagonist eventually ends up in a huge sea-facing mansion. Again, my great-grandfather followed a similar trajectory and also had a bungalow on Pedder Road, which was sea-facing. There is a beautiful building opposite Woodlands, which was the bungalow property on Pedder Road. This beautiful building has been for a long time a school called Villa Teresa. And that building served as inspiration for the residence of a royal family in my novel. The next morning, they headed towards Apollo Bandar with the crowds to try and catch a glimpse of the new king. Radha handed a cloth bundle to Tatya as he readied to leave. "I have packed some pori bhaji," she said, "and some sweet snacks. Who knows how long you will have to wait there." Armed with these supplies and 2 screw-top tambias of water, Tatya, Dada and the 2 boys, Sharad and Mandar, headed out. At the last moment, it was decided that 3-year-old Ganesh would be left behind with Radha, for his eyes were pale and his forehead was hot. Judging by the horse-mounted police that were clip-clopping up and down Sandhurst Road, just near their chawl, it was all but certain that the royal procession would come down that way at some point during the day. Early that morning, there was a curious anticipation in the neighborhood, as if the air had stilled and was waiting. But soon the children began dancing about as if it were the start of a festival. I was very inspired by the sea, because even growing up, the sea played a very big part in my life, simply in terms of just being there as an unchanging presence, perhaps something that was a constant, where other things in my life were perhaps less constant and more changeable. I think it was a sort of anchor for me, and I think that somehow translated in the novel into it being a sort of anchor for my protagonist Tatya as well, a way for him to reflect on his own life. I think the sea has this unnerving ability to reflect your own life back at you. This can be unnerving, but it can also be very inspiring to look out at the horizon and to see the vast sky above. It shows you the possibilities of what you could do. But really what moves me about the sea is the fact that it's an unchanging constant in an ever-changing world. And Bombay was in a period of huge flux in the first half of the 20th century. Things were changing very rapidly from the traditional to the modern. And in my novel, these are the changes that many of my characters are grappling with, particularly the female characters. And through all that change, the sea remains a constant for Tatya from the beginning of his life to the end. The process of writing the book created a different kind of city for me in my head, a city of layers and historical complexity. A little bit like, I think it's called a diorama, where you have, in a box, you have figures or things at different places going back further into the back of the box. So writing this novel created that kind of sensation for me, where there are layers of history and layers of architecture. For example, Pedder Road, where a lot of the novel is based, where there's the huge mansion in the novel. At that time, it was a tree-lined avenue with one big bungalow after another. And now it's full of high-rise buildings and a lot of traffic, where you have to sometimes talk loudly to hear yourself speak. Being on the JCB shortlist means a great deal to me, because this is my first novel and I am sharing the shortlist with some real veteran writers. So that itself, it's been a great honor to get to know them, to interact with them, and to know that I've succeeded in taking my novel to a certain sort of excellence, which is what I was always aiming at while writing it. The JCB award itself, I think, is unique in the way that it promotes everyone on the long list and on the short list. I haven't seen that with any other awards, and that shows a real commitment to promoting literature as a whole.